Hello! Welcome to the first lecture for the course Making Better Group Decisions, Voting, Judgment Aggregation, and Fair Division. In this first week, we're going to focus on the problem of voting. So this is a problem where you have a set of candidates and a group of voters, and these voters have preferences over the candidates. So they can rank the candidates from their favorite to their least favorite. And the question of voting is, how do you take all of those preferences and aggregate them, combine them somehow to determine who actually won the election, or perhaps what is the group preference ordering? So in this very first lecture, I want to just focus on what is the problem of voting. So in other words, the voting problem. We're going to look at why this is perhaps a slightly more difficult problem than many of you may have previously thought. So let's just dive right in. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at a concrete example. And this is an example where we have 21 voters. So imagine a society or a small group of people consisting of 21 voters get together and they're holding an election. And there are 4 candidates: Anne, Bob, Charles, and Dora. And each of the voters are asked to rank these candidates from their favorite, their top candidate, to their least favorite, their worst candidate. And also the voters are instructed that they're not allowed to list ties, so you're not allowed to rank 2 people at the same level. Now let's imagine that we've gathered all of this data and it's displayed here in the table. So for example, this column here, we see that there are 6 voters that have this particular ranking. And what the ranking means is that candidate C is ranked first, candidate B is ranked second, D is ranked third, and A is ranked last. So C is the favorite, A is the least favorite. We have all 21 voters represented here. 3 plus 5 plus 7 plus 6 is equal to 21. And so this is the data. This is the reflection of everybody's preferences in this small society. Now, imagine that the society got together, they held the election, they asked everybody to rank all the candidates, but they stupidly forgot to decide how to elect the winner. So they have all of this data, but they did not decide beforehand what method they would use to actually determine the winner. So they come to you and they ask you, who should win the election? Here's our data, and we're going to assume that the data reflects the true preferences of the voter. But they still want to know. So the question is, who should actually win this election? And what I would like is for all of you to pause for a second and take a survey. There'll be a link, and you follow the link, and you'll be able to take a survey where you will answer this question. And I want you to answer this question just based on your intuitions. You look at the data, you say, this is the preferences that I see, and who should actually win the election? And maybe one of the answers is, you haven't given me enough information. I don't have enough information to answer that question. That's an option as well. So take a moment, answer the survey, and just based on your basic intuitions about who should win, elect fairness, and who best represents the population, determine which of the candidates should win the election. Okay, so what I want to do now in the remaining part of this lecture is go through the candidates one by one and give arguments in favor or against them winning the election. So let's start with candidate A. And immediately what you can see, if you ignore most of the data, so you ignore the bottom part of everybody's preferences and just focus on their top preferences, we see that candidate A receives 8 votes, candidate B receives 7, and candidate C receives 6. So candidate A actually receives the most first place votes. So if candidate A received the most first place votes, then that's a good argument why candidate A should be declared the winner. And in fact, in many elections, that's what would actually happen. Candidate A would would end up winning because you typically would just ask people to just select one person who they would like to vote for, so their favorite candidate. However, I think there's a better argument or a stronger argument why candidate A should in fact not win. So if you take a look, note that 13 people rank A at the very bottom of their list. So that means more than half of the people rank A last. So it is true that A received more first place votes than any of the other candidates, but more than half of the population believes that A is the worst candidate. And so the conclusion is that, in fact, candidate A should not win the election because a strong majority, well over half, think A is the worst candidate. Okay, so let's move on to candidate D. So we've ruled out candidate A. Now what about candidate D? I claim that there's a good argument why candidate D should not be declared the winner. Now, the first thing you might note is that D does not receive any first place votes. On the face of it, that's not a reason you might think that's a reason to reject Dora, that D should not win. But in fact, it might be that D has lots and lots of second place votes, so D might turn out to be a good compromise. But in fact, I believe there's a very nice argument why D should not be declared the winner. So take a moment and see if you can figure out why do I think that D definitely should not be declared the winner. So let's take a look at candidate B. Candidate B is unanimously ranked above D. So everyone ranks B above D. So there's consensus that another candidate, in this case Bob, is strictly preferred to Dora. So this is not an argument that Bob should be declared the winner, but it is an argument that Dora should not be declared the winner. So the argument is that Dora should not be declared the winner because it's unanimous that there's another candidate that is strictly preferred to Dora. Okay, so that leaves us with candidates B and C. So which of B versus C, Bob versus Charles, should actually win the election? Well, the debate actually goes back to the 18th century between the two founding fathers of modern voting theory, the Marquis de Condorcet and Jean-Charles de Borda. And Condorcet, essentially we can view the debate they had that started modern voting theory as being a debate about which of the two candidates, Bob or Charles, should actually be declared the winner of the election. Which of the two candidates best reflects what it is that small society actually wants, who they want to actually win the election. So let's look at their two arguments. And we're going to start with Condorcet. And what Condorcet noticed is that candidate C beats every other candidate in a head-to-head election. And C, any candidate that satisfies this property is what's called a Condorcet winner. So let's see what I mean by that. So let's compare C versus candidate A. In a head-to-head election, so we look at the rankings and we forget about B and D and we imagine that the race is just between Charles and Anne. And if it was just between Charles and Anne, we see that 13 people rank C above A, so they would naturally vote for Charles. But 8 people rank Anne above Charles, so they would naturally vote for Anne. So in a head-to-head election, Charles would be declared the winner. Now, when Charles goes up against Bob, it's a close race. Bob gets 10 votes, but Charles squeaks by with 1 extra vote. So Charles will get 11 votes and Bob gets 10 votes. So in a head-to-head elections, it's Charles who will actually win that election. And then finally, against Dora, we see that Charles easily beats Dora. Dora gets 7 votes and Charles gets 14 votes. So in head-to-head election, C versus Charles versus Anne, Charles versus Bob, and Charles versus Dora, Charles always ends up winning those elections. So since in every head-to-head election, Charles wins, Charles should be declared the winner. Now, what's Borda's? That seems pretty good. What about Borda's argument? What's Borda? Why does Borda not think that Charles should be declared the winner? Well, both Borda and Condorcet believe that you should focus on these head-to-head elections. But Borda's complaint against Condorcet is that he's simply recording the win-loss record. You're simply recording whether or not you beat the other candidate in a head-to-head election. You're not recording any of the other aspects of the data, namely, by how much did you win by? What's the spread? So there's a huge difference between a very close race, like it is between Bob and Charles, so 10-11, and a knockdown argument where it's unanimous that everybody prefers some candidate over the other. So what Borda wants us to do is go through and compare head-to-head elections, but give candidates a certain number of points depending on how many votes they actually get. So this will record not just whether or not a candidate beats another candidate, but by how much how much support there is for a particular candidate. So when Bob goes up against Ann, we see that Bob gets 13 votes, and the remaining 8 people would vote for Ann, so he doesn't get any support from those 8. But from this group over here, he gets 13 points. Against Charles, we've already mentioned this, that Bob is going to get 10 points because 10 people will vote for Bob over Charles. And now against Dora, we actually mentioned this earlier in the slides, everybody, all 21 people prefer Bob over Dora. So Bob gets lots and lots of support against Dora. He gets a bit of support against Charles. He loses in a head-to-head election against Charles, but he gets a bit of support. But against Dora, he gets overwhelming. Everybody supports him over Dora. Now, what about Charles? Well, we can do a similar calculation for Charles. And when Charles goes head-to-head against Ann, we see that he gets 13 votes. Against Bob, we mentioned before, he gets 11 votes. And against Dora, we see that Charles ends up with 14 points. So the total number, there's 14 points of support for Bob and 38 points of support for Charles. Of course, we need to calculate how many points Ann and Dora each receive. But it should be fairly clear that Ann and Dora both will definitely receive fewer points than either Bob or Charles. So Bob has overall the most support and so should be declared the winner. So we're in a situation in which there's a knockdown argument that Ann should not win, should not be declared the winner. There's a knockdown argument that Dora should not be declared the winner. But there seem to be 2 pretty good arguments that either Charles should win or Bob should actually win. So how do we answer our original question? This poor society came to you, they need to elect a winner. They say, who should actually win the election? So our only answer really is, well, there's many ways to answer this question. In this example, there's at least 2 ways to answer this question. Both Charles and Bob seem to have, there's a pretty good argument why each one of them reflect what it is that the society actually wants. So in the remaining lectures this week, we're going to look at the different methods that can be used to find winners in a particular election. Okay, thank you.